All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ideas World Cup thematic webinar. We are so excited today. My name is Lee Kitchen, and I work for a company called Magical Dude Consulting. I was a guest last week, and my good buddy Mark Dodsworth asked me to host today. So I'm super excited to be here. I had a great time last week. I really appreciate all the great questions from the chat and all that kind of stuff. But we have some fun stuff to talk about today. Again, this is our third thematic webinar. And today we are talking about how to develop your ideas into reality, which is a really important part of the process. And we definitely want to cover that. But better yet, we have a really great guest with us all the way from Cambridge, UK, right? Is that what you said?
Yes, I'm in Cambridge.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, please meet Rosina Dorelli. Rosina, I looked at your LinkedIn page and wow, you have such a great lineup of stuff and it's just really, really, really impressive. So thank you so much for being here with us today. And initially when Mark connected us, he said that you were into biophilic education. And I can't wait to ask you about that because I married a farmer, right? And so I'm really close to the whole, getting close to nature and things like that. So I'm super excited. So welcome, Rosina. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lee.
I would
Yeah.
love for you to just tell us a little bit about you are the founder and director of the Davinci Life Skills Design, Art, and Technology group, and it sounds really like you have a really great mission. And I would love for you to just tell us a little bit about what that is and kind of what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, well, thank you. I am a design teacher. I'm an artist as well. I've been an artist and a furniture designer and all sorts, but I've been an art and a design technology teacher for like 20 years now. And what I noticed within the mainstream system was that it wasn't designed particularly well. Education, it's not very fit for purpose right now. It was probably pretty good 100 years
I
ago.
was like, was it 30 years ago? I don't know.
I think like maybe 100 years ago it was great, but
Yeah.
things have changed and we live in a different world now. We live in a technological age, and we need to design a new education system for that age. And there's so many issues coming together. It feels a bit like a kind of a storm moment, and the eye of the storm is coming. And what with climate change and the inventions in technology, and also, I mean, in the UK we have a lot of depression. We've got some of the unhappiest kids in the world,
Oh,
according
wow.
to reports, and which I've witnessed too in classes of kids being really unhappy, and the sort of stress of high stakes exams and the lack of worth of many of the different. I mean, basically, there's a lot of kids that aren't academic, that's not their biggest strength,
Yeah.
and we
I
don't
was I
need.
was one of those kids, just so you know.
Well, we just don't need everybody to be academic. It's not like everyone in the world needs to be a university professor.
Right.
We need people with all sorts of skills, and those are caring skills, manual skills, just a whole range, creative skills. And so we've designed a school and a whole curriculum. It's called Davinci Life Skills, and it's really for Leonardo da Vinci. It's a place where someone like Leonardo da Vinci could flourish.
Yeah.
Leonardo was a polymath, which means he was interested in art, science. He was a botanist, a geographer,
Yeah.
a designer, a stage designer, costumes. He literally did
He
everything.
couldn't decide, right? I mean, he had so many things that he was interested in.
Yeah, sculptor. Yeah, he did everything, and he was fascinated just by the world, and he was fascinated constantly from the day he was born to his end. I think he had a curiosity that was childlike, and I think that's inherent in all of us, really, a curiosity for the world. And quite often schools sort of extinguish that and
Yeah.
that desire to learn. And so we're trying to make a space where he could really, like, we're all project based. So, because what we're
Wow.
talking about here is getting your ideas into projects. So it's much more about listening to students and working with their ideas and their passions.
I
It's
love it.
it's a whole project based system. And yeah, also Leonardo was, I think people have said that he was probably dyslexic, which means that actually he probably would have failed, considering what a talented person he
Oh
was.
yeah.
it's
Well,
quite
he was also a, I mean, like what we know today as ADHD, right?
probably
So,
he could have been
yeah,
any of those things. And this idea that people are neurally diverse, my feeling is that we are all neurally diverse,
yeah,
and everyone, and we need to value that rather than to have people that are other and people that are
right.
supposedly this is the right kind of person you need to be in school. I think it's kind of immoral. I think it's
Yeah,
unethical.
and the system sets it up for success for those who are academic, right? So
Exactly.
it's hard for the non-academics to really find success in that system.
Yeah.
So I'm so happy to hear about this way of education and this way of teaching. An analogy I use a lot in my workshops is when you graduate kindergarten, they give you a box of 164 crayons. When you graduate high school, you get one color pen. You know, so it's kind of like an analogy for they kind of beat the creativity out of you from point A to point B. So,
Yeah.
really happy to hear that you're on a mission to change that. So, thank
Yeah.
you. So today's webinar, we are talking about. Last week we talked about how to make idea selection. So Ideas World Cup is all about creating a really big quantity of ideas, of course. And last week we talked about how really to select the best ones. So once we've selected the best ones, it is time to develop the ones that we've selected. So I wanted to just talk to you and pick your brain about how do you go about developing those ideas? What kind of resources do you use? What kind of process do you go through to do that? And where do you come out at the other end, I guess?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, because
It's a loaded
that
question, right?
well, it's exactly what I teach too. So I teach design. So it's design technology is all about how do you develop ideas and how do you ideation and creative thinking and problem solving.
Well, yeah, and
So
actually, you know what, Rosina, if you
yeah,
want to take us through kind of, you know, we talked in general about the design thinking process last week, you know, scoping out your challenge, empathizing
yeah,
with your end user, ideating and developing. If you want to
yeah.
talk a little bit about those, how you come up with, how you do that side of it before we get to developing, please give us a little
Yeah,
insight
well,
into
the
how you
way
do
I
that.
would teach very much the way I do it and the way I teach is going back to the source. So you go back to the word. So say you were designing a chair, you would say, well, rather than looking at lots of chairs, which would cause design fixation, you
Yep.
would say, well, what am I actually designing? Or even like sunglasses, like instead of saying I'm designing a pair of glasses, I'm designing something that shades me from the glare of the sun.
Right.
And then it could be a hat, a visor, it
Yeah,
could be
or you're
something that
designing
you
something to make you look super cool.
or something that and
Right?
it's looking at what the actual design brief is and then you go back to instead of fixating on what there is what you've seen before to get new ideas it's great to start going, well, what's the core of the word, what's the core of the subject that I'm looking at, and go back to its origins and find out what really write down the design brief or the idea brief. What is the problem that I'm trying to solve? And then it's about brainstorming, mind mapping,
Right.
getting as many ideas out as possible. You want to get all the stupid ideas, anything out,
Absolutely.
just load
Absolutely.
it out there, and
I
then
love
you
that
start.
concept. If I could interrupt for a second, Rosina, I love that
Yeah,
concept of simplifying your challenge. I feel like a lot of companies, a lot of groups, when they set out to solve a challenge, it's so overcomplicated for everybody to understand. It's really hard to solve because you don't even understand what the scope of it is just by looking at it. So just bringing it down the funnel just to simplify it just a little bit really solidifies it in everybody's head. So it's not just the experts, it's everybody who's connected to it. And just by keeping it just a little bit simpler, you really do get to a better place. Do you find that's the truth as
I
well?
definitely do. I definitely do. And with education, the thing that we were actually working out with education was like, well, what if we take that right back to the beginning? Because if it's got to a place where it's been designed and everyone's trying to work it out, how are we going to do it differently?
Yeah.
And I think that for us, it was like, well, that's the thing about biophilic education and biophilic design that you mentioned at the start, is that but within DT, I've been teaching this thing called biophilic design, biophilia being the passionate love of all that's alive.
I love
And
it.
what they do is they've basically worked out what human beings need to flourish. And what's so what we and that's basically in terms of your environment. What do we need in our environment? Maybe that our species doesn't need rectilinear walls. Maybe we need more organic spaces. It
Right.
seems that the research shows that we need green spaces. We need to see daylight. We need to see weather. We need to experience like noises like water or fire. Like, and there's a certain
Exactly.
things that we feel like comfort. And so when I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, well, how about education? How, as a species, do we want to educate our young? And it was like, well, actually, if we go back to the beginning in the design process in terms of education, maybe we could look at, well, what does our species come from? We come from these tribal groups. We sing, dance, adorned ourselves, and told
Yep.
stories. And we had rituals, rites of passage. All of those things are core to us as a species. And I think that's where this sort of idea of biophilic education came from. It's like one hand in the soil and listening to what our ancestors and our
Yep.
traditional sort of human knowledge, but then this one hand on the computer keyboard
Yeah.
and going into the future and kind of combining the ancient with the futuristic. And let's try and design a new education that could incorporate both. Do you know what I mean? So it's bringing
I
those
I totally get that.
the
And
low
also
tech and
kind
the
of
high
taking
tech.
advantage of our what's in our core DNA anyway, right? So
Exactly.
I come from the marketing world, and it always frustrated me in the marketing world that we would try so hard to change behavior instead of taking advantage of existing behavior that's happening and occurring, because again, we're all humans and we all kind of follow some of the same patterns. So it seems like that would definitely help in the education space, because you're not trying to change the way somebody thinks, right?
Yeah.
Excellent.
I was just looking in the notes. Somebody said that education comes from educare, which means to nourish and nurture the mind, not to do with schooling, which I really like actually.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And actually that brings up a really good point. One of the things that we talk about in design thinking is nurturing ideas and nurturing and building ideas. How does your group in your day to day, how do you help either in education nurture fresh ideas and keep them going? And what kind of things do you do to kind of help support that nurturing part?
Well, that's what I think that one of the biggest issues with education is that it's so much of it is dictatorial, kind of standing at the front. I have all the knowledge. I'm the teacher. I'm going to give you a whole.
Yeah, encouraging that one right answer when there's not one right answer,
Exactly,
right?
and
Yeah,
you're the empty bucket. I have all the knowledge. I'm going to fill your empty bucket in, and it's not that. It's about working with people and discovery together. And I think as teachers, what we're encouraging is the sense of, yeah, it's more of a facilitator. You're there to discover the world and to signpost and to support people to find out what they're interested in and who they
yes,
are and how can you be the best you. And it's not about
absolutely.
complete freedom. I think you need, I think complete autonomy is a lot of a pressure that you have
Hmm.
to come up with everything yourself. But I think if you can push people and go, you can do this. I think you can
Yeah,
do this. And it's about that relationship, isn't it? It's all about relationships, working with people and encouraging them
absolutely.
to do
And
something a bit
guidance is
difficult.
great. Guidance and
Yeah.
coaching also along the way is awesome. Let me. Another question I would ask you is: do you find that you will, instead of dictating back a solution or a way of doing things, that you'll ask? I think about it like a therapist. When you go to a therapist, they don't dictate what you should do or how you should behave. They ask you a bunch of questions so you figure it out yourself. So do you end up asking a lot of questions of the folks that you're educating and kind of help them come to their own solutions?
It's exactly that.
I
Exactly, you're
love it.
exactly right. It's yeah, you go into, and that's what I mean right at the beginning. It's like, well, okay, we do a project about we were doing talking about one about migration the other day, and then it's the first thing I would do if I was given a project like that would be like to ask the children, well, what do you know about migration? What different kinds of migration are there? Let's find out what us as a group know, then we can work on well, let's share this knowledge that we already have, and then what do we need to know, where are we going with this,
I love it.
and then let's go on that journey together, because I don't know
Yes.
everything about migration. I'm happy to learn with you, and it's about
Yeah.
helping support people.
And
um,
also, we all have the aha moment together. But believe it or not, that's one thing I always recommend to my clients is is if we're going to go and understand our end user and our consumer, we might have a whole group that's an expert at them. You know, a lot of companies have what they call a consumer insights group, and I say that's great. They can take the lead, but we want everybody to have that aha together. So let's bring everybody along in the project and the team to kind of realize that epiphany. So that's a great point. I love it. So
Yeah.
tell me again, you come up with some great ideas. You've nurtured those ideas. You've got them. How do you start that? How do you start once you've made the selections? Of course. How do you start in that developing? What kind of key things do you do?
Yeah.
Do you think about to really start polishing that idea to make it the best it could be?
It's, I think, one, research. So
Yeah.
once you kind of got all your ideas out there, that's when you start honing them down, and you start thinking, okay, well, which ones stand out to me? Which of those, that whole mass of brainstorming, which ones look great? Then maybe just developing a few, and then those through, that's what, then you start your research. So you can either go look online, obviously nowadays, or you go and talk to people.
Okay.
It's that critical thinking moment. It's going, identifying what obstacles might be there, what people are involved, what empathy you might need to feel to this situation, whatever
Yep.
it is. And once you've kind of identified all of that, then it's really about, okay, now that's the strategy of how we're going to put this project together wherever we're going,
Yep.
and to develop that with being aware of all the obstacles and how we're going to place our
Yeah.
place our time and get there. And this is all the things that we're teaching. So we've kind of got,
Love it.
I'm saying it because I've just been writing out all of our assessment model, and it's literally all of these things. So we're assessing things like ideation and strategy and self-management, and how you bring yourself to the project. And I think it's bringing that sense of openness and sense of commitment, awareness of others. Teamwork is
Yep.
incredibly important. Who am I working with on this project?
Yeah.
How can I,
Collaboration. It's like key, right?
yeah, how can I listen to their ideas and incorporate them, and not just blast them all? And
Yeah. So
um,
another question I would ask for you is, I believe many people in the design thinking space, many people believe that after ideation, that ends the divergent part of design thinking. I'm a believer that you have to use both divergent and convergent within the development process. So you have to be both expansive and reductive. And again, it's kind of a fine line, because I always say that you can only be expansive at a certain time to create those ideas, and then you can be reductive the next day. How do you go about managing both that expansive thinking and that reductive thinking while you're developing one particular idea? Do you have to do you use some tools that you help people on both sides, or is it kind of a free for all? How do you go about that?
that's the iterative design process, isn't it? That's
Exactly.
what we're calling
Yeah.
it, the iterative design. It's literally about being prepared to fail and being okay about that. So I think you maybe, so you've whittled your ideas down to one or two, and then you start progressing down those two pathways, and then you realize one starts shining more, go down that pathway, and
Right.
then you're facing all the problems within that. So how do we solve these problems when you're in that pathway? And then it's and as you go about, I mean, in design, you're making lots of maquettes, and you're doing lots of drawings. You do customer research. You see if it works. And as it doesn't, you need to be prepared to fail massively.
Right.
And then you need to be prepared to get back up. And I think that's a huge thing too. We're calling it collapse processing within our school thing. It's about how well can I fail, get back up
Yeah.
again, and keep
Yeah.
doing
And
it,
just keep
keep doing
going.
it, keep doing. I mean, like Dyson, how many hoovers do they make? Or like, not hoovers, that's the wrong thing to say, isn't it?
Yeah.
How
It
many
was like
vacuum
1,000. It was
cleaners?
like 1,400. It was a lot, right?
I mean, before they actually put it out there, and I think
And
that's,
those were
yeah,
physical. He actually made them physically, so he didn't just draw them on a page. He actually made
yeah,
physical
the
versions of that.
prototypes. Yeah,
I
it's
love it.
it's about, and that's why it's constantly about exploring your idea and honing it. And as you say, there might be a moment where you just have to go back to the beginning and go, did we have another idea on that huge
Yeah.
sheet, that maybe, because this one's coming to a bit of a dead end, and you need to be
Right.
prepared to let go of stuff when it doesn't work that way, and let's go back. And that's why it's useful having that huge board of ideas at the beginning, because then you go, actually, maybe if we linked it with that and that, we could bring those two things in, and then it might work, and it's keeping, do you know what I mean? It's the
Yeah. Well, you
generation.
just reminded me of a phrase that I use frequently, and that is through the process, you really shouldn't marry your ideas because, like a relationship, you really should just date to see where it goes, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, right? Just like you said, and sometimes you have to make the hard selection on whether to continue or not. And that brings up a good point. Prototyping is a part of the design thinking phase that really fits in several spots. Prototyping fits in the development side, where again, like you say, you're trying stuff, you're failing fast, you're seeing where you're going. But a lot of companies out in the world, they do real time prototyping. Apple's a great example. They send a product out, it's only at 80%, and they use the consumer feedback to kind of get it to where it goes. Where do you see prototyping in the process? Like what part of the development, like towards the tail end, towards the beginning? And do you have any? Is there a story that you can tell us about prototyping something that either was a success or a failure or something like that?
Well, that's a good question. I think
Sorry, putting you on the spot there.
no, that's true. I mean, when I instantly I think about prototypes and design, my brain goes to ergonomics, because I think that's what I'm always teaching my students is about ergonomics and anthropometric data. Two great words. Anthropometric is such a hard word to say.
Anthropometric, is that what it
Yeah,
is?
it's
Wow.
anthropometric data,
I'm
and
using that in the sentence later today.
it's well, that's about the measurements of the human body in design. So, for example, if you're designing a water bottle like this, you'd need to measure the hand. So it's the
Yeah.
average measurements of the human body in relation to design around you. So it's and then ergonomics is user experience. So when you're designing things, it's always about user experience, and that's every kind of thing. So the noise, the sound, the texture, and you're constantly considering. I know I'm not answering your question very well, but those are the
No, no,
things that are
I
coming to
find
my
it
head.
interesting.
um, but yeah, I don't know in
So,
terms of disasters that have come back. Um, I think it is that thing that you said about not being too. I think the problem you often see, and also particularly in teaching, is that people come up with an idea and that they just stuck. That I just want to do that idea,
yeah,
the
they
first
just jump
one,
to it.
and
Yep,
it's really hard to let go, as you say, of the
absolutely.
idea that you have. And it's so important to be able to let go of your initial ideas and to allow them to evolve, and just to be open. I think that's one of the key things, is to let go of things that
Yeah.
aren't working.
There is a lot of, and it's, I come from the corporate world, so there's a lot of that ego checking that needs to happen, especially with a lot of senior leaders, because sometimes senior leaders come in with, they've already married their ideas and they're trying to push their ideas, and sometimes it's not the best for what we're trying to accomplish. So I love that differentiation is kind of, you have to be willing to let go, because whatever you've created and you're really passionate about just might not work for what you're really trying to solve for. So
Yeah,
I totally feel for that.
yeah. Really
So
an
so
education thing.
I would ask you, as you are doing this idea creation, you talked a little bit about the ergonomics and about the human centricity of it. One of the things that comes to mind was, Steve Jobs was always adamant about, and just like Henry Ford, if Henry Ford had asked his consumers, they would have said they wanted a faster horse, right? So, at what point do you? And I know, again, I come from the corporate world, so a lot of companies that I work with, they actually have like a customer panel that they'll throw ideas in front of to get opinions from the customer. What are your thoughts on when you bring in your end user, and what kind of questions or ways do you ask them that doesn't kind of lead the witness? So I find that many times when we go to do that, we're just looking for validation on ideas that we should have let go, right? So how do you keep it unbiased, and how do you kind of get your validation again without leading your consumer the way you want them to,
That's a
or
good,
your end
very
user?
good. I think it's impossible. I actually think it's impossible to not be biased. I think it's the almost it's I think you just need to be aware of your bias. And so you come at it knowing, and to be open and say, this is my bias. And I think
Interesting.
I think that also in terms of, like, for example, because I'm looking at, okay, how do we design a new education system? And I know that I'll do things wrong, and I know that I'll do things that need iterating. And as we're designing as a team, we keep listening to each other and working out how we're going to do this, and it's a constant development. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's that acceptance that it's gonna be wrong, but it's really hard you know. I think it's maybe the way I do it is through intuition. To be honest, it's a hard
Oh,
one. I think there's a difference in your brain. There's whether you feel something right. It's about letting go and trying to listen. And it sounds it sounds maybe kind of
no,
um,
it sounds
it's
perfect. And the listening part is really important at this stage because they
yeah.
might tell you something that you had an assumption about, and it might break your assumption just by listening. So I guess what I was saying in your case when you were doing your thing and you're engaging your end user, you've created something you're prototyping.
Yeah.
What kind of I guess what kind of questions would you ask? What kind of things what kind of information would you want to extract? I suppose.
That's what, yeah, sorry, I didn't answer that question very well. Um, yeah, well, I mean, we're talking to parents and teachers and schools. So, and as you say, it's quite difficult in our situation because we have a current system where everybody values in the UK GCSEs and exam results,
Standardized
and
testing.
it's
It's
all
not just
about
the
standard.
UK. US does that too.
Yeah, so to change people's minds on what's the most important thing is massive, and I think the way that that's happening, I think it's the same thing with petrol cars, and how are we going to just change it all? Is hybrids, I think, is the way of going about that, and it's about doing incremental steps and working
Yep.
out a hybrid system that we can do things slowly. And I think in terms of your customers, it's when something's radically new, it's about easing it into
Yeah.
it's about like this is I mean what's great is that I haven't yet met a teacher or a parent or a kid that hasn't got, oh my god, we need your thing now, which
Yeah.
is really nice. But there is a concern, but then will they get into university, will they get a good job? And it is that moment of tension of like, but we still got this system and this is what everyone values, and it's
Yeah.
how do we transition. So I think it's about how do we run a hybrid model that allows both systems to run, and until we can slowly let the other one come in. And I think it's not shocking people
Yeah.
into to believe.
I would imagine that's a fine line too, because you're still dealing with young, impressionable people, and
Yeah,
trying to balance both sides of that is probably one of the more difficult parts of your job, I would imagine.
yeah, yeah, we don't want to
That
mess it up too
because
much.
they still have to turn in your homework and they still have to do everything by the system, but you still want them to get outside the system to think about it. So,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more. You talked about project-based work for these students. Tell us a little bit more how you go about kind of getting them the education while they're doing that real-time stuff. I found that kind of fascinating, especially when it comes to creating something. So giving them a task to you take an idea and create it. What kind of things do you do to go about that part? It sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, project-based learning. I mean, there's a lot of research that shows that the way we actually remember things is through context and storytelling.
Oh,
And
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to stop you there because in my undergrad, that was the most frustrating thing for me, and I would probably be one of your students at this point. But one of the most frustrating things for me is my professors could not put whatever it was I was learning into my context. And so I struggle with understanding, why do I need to know this information if you can't tell me how I'm going to use this information? So I'm very fascinated by that. Tell me a little bit more about it.
so
Sounds
that's
awesome.
exactly what we're doing, because I get asked that all the time. Why do we have to learn this? So the way we've designed the curriculum, what we've done is to take the national curriculum in the UK. We've coded all of the learning objectives, and what we've done is so we're teaching the same content. We're just delivering it through projects where the students then know what it is that they're doing and why they're doing it. So if you're doing, for example, we're designing a cafe with students right now in a school in Bali, and they're growing the food, they're working with a local farmer, but they've been doing customer survey, as you were talking
Wow.
about, and they taking the data from that. So they're having to do statistics, they're looking at percentages. So what
Ah, I
percentage are
love it.
gluten free, what percentage of their potential customers want Wi-Fi and want a workspace? So they're having to then consider and show all of that data. Well, do we do a bar chart? Do we do a pie chart? What shows the information in the best way? And then you're having to learn, what should we say? well, that's 1/3, or is that 33.3
Yeah.
333%? What's the best way of showing it? And then you're understanding why we need percentages, why do we need data, why do we need to look at it? And then we've got budgets. So so if we've got a budget, this is our budget, can we afford the organic avocados? If that percentage of your customers want organic food, then we have to make decisions on, okay, well, that's the expense of it. So then there's so much learning in practically doing things.
Yeah.
And then
It's
we were looking
amazing.
at things like nutrition. So then it's like, well, what are we going to serve in this cafe if the food is nutritious? If we're going to grow it, where we need to understand about permaculture, we need to understand about weather,
Right.
and seasonal foods. We need to then understand about growing and soils and the chemical reactions that go on within life and in growth. There's tons of biology. And then in cooking, there's tons of chemistry and the combinations of things. You've got all of the what's nutrition and understanding vitamins, and the amount of learning just in building a cafe is insane. And then you can design the space and build the space. We need to understand physics. If you're building a table, let's think about the engineering of this chair or this room. But yeah,
that's like you basically just put all of high school in one project.
Exactly.
It's awesome. It's really, really, really awesome. I was thinking when you were talking about this, I was thinking about the creativity profiles that we often use in our creative problem solving stuff, and that comes from a system that I learned from the Buffalo State University for creativity called Foresight. And basically Foresight identifies people as clarifiers, ideators, developers, or implementers. And I'm wondering, in your students, as you're starting to see, like, when you worked in when I worked in project teams in my undergrad, there was always a variety of people, but if you got a bunch of ideators on one team, we never got anything. We didn't get anything done, right? So it was important to kind of balance the teams just based on intuition. But I'm wondering, do you kind of see those traits emerge in your students, and do you try to mix them up in a way where they all complement each other? So you have a couple clarifiers, a couple ideators, and a couple developers, implementers, so everybody kind of uses some of their nature stuff as well as their nurture stuff, is what I would be curious about.
Definitely. I think that's the point. And I think that's why that's the value of working in a team, and what the real value of schools could be, rather than trying to make everybody think the same and be the same and know the same thing. It's like, well, look at the diversity of people we've got around this table. Who's good at what part of this project? And it's like, who wants to try out this? You haven't tried being if you say you're making
give
a
it
film.
Try.
I've done loads of film projects with kids, and it's like, right, who wants to be the director today? Who wants to be the screenwriter? Who wants to do that? And they're brilliant, because they, occasionally they don't want to, and I'm like, why don't you try it? Have a go. And they're like,
I love it.
Wow. And they try it, and they're like, oh, I was the director and I actually did it. I actually quite enjoyed this. And it's a little bit of allowing people to be what they want to be and pushing them to do what they don't dare do. And
absolutely. And the stakes are not as high as when they get into the corporate world. When they do that in the corporate world, the stakes are really high because it matters for your job and your promotion and all that kind of stuff. So having a safe environment like this to learn and to be comfortable with failing is just wonderful. And like I always say in my workshops, I'm like, don't just, there's probably one person among you that is an artist by nature, and you practice your art. Let the person who draws stick figures draw the rendering, right? So because stick figures are perfect. It doesn't always have to be the artist or the gifted copywriter to write the copy either, right? Everybody should take a turn, because you never know, you may become that gifted copywriter after writing copy that first time. So
it's so true it's so true. You get sort of stereotyped so quickly that it's really, really good to have that experience. We have one project pathway that is gaming, so it's role play game. So like Dungeons and Dragons, we're teaching the whole curriculum again through Dungeons and Dragons style teaching. But with that, you've got this team of people, and they've got to work on coming out. And what's really what I love about that, working within the game, it's like, as you said, about the safety of being within school. If you're an avatar, so within the role play games, you create an avatar, and you don't have to be the one that's then your character is doing all of the strategy and the decision making and stuff. So it then takes you one step removed, and it makes it a bit safer, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, it's
So
really interesting. Sorry.
here's a question I'll ask you. When you are in this developing and taking this idea and developing to somewhere, what as the leader of the group, and as you know, watching as many students as you've watched, what brings you the most joy? What do the students do that you just go, oh, that's awesome? It just brings me, like, you watch it and you just get the most joy of it. I would love to know what that is, because it sounds like you probably get that on a daily basis. Just, I mean, leading young people is probably inspiring enough as it is. But is there one or two things that you could tell our audience that is just like, oh, this is the greatest thing when this happens?
Definitely. I was asked actually by my niece this week. She said, "What's your favorite thing in the whole world?" And I was this exact thing. I was like, it's doing really creative projects with young people and seeing them in their flow. So when you see somebody that's lost in creativity and they're just
Oh,
so absorbed and just loving it, that is the most satisfying feeling in the whole world.
yeah, absolutely.
And then also there's one other thing is at the end when they like, did I do that? And I think for me, so much of education at the minute is seen as, if an adult does any part of that for you, that's cheating. But
Yeah.
that's not how it used to be. In Davinci's time, Verrocchio, he worked in Verrocchio's studio. He had Verrocchio had all of his paintings, and Leonardo would paint on them, and together they would create something. And I really believe in working with students. And so, like when we're making a film, if I help them do some of the editing or I help them do some of the design, what you can produce at the end with a group of like 10-year-olds, and they produce a professional looking film, they're
Awesome.
like, wow, look what I have made. And they wouldn't have been able to do it necessarily by themselves. But when you've done it with an adult, the sense of like, I want to do that again.
Yeah,
Look how brilliant I am. You
I
know,
love it.
I think that's really that those moments are really exciting.
Believe it or not, that transcends education, because I see it happening in my day-to-day workshops. I would go to a session where a bunch of people don't feel like they're creative. I give them permission to be creative, and by the end, they're like, "I cannot believe I could do this." Right? So, you know, when you ignite that in an adult, which is sad, because if they had to have this way of educating, they probably wouldn't have had all the creativity kind of beat out of them, right? But
Yeah.
it's such a joy bringing creativity. I love the way you described that. It was really great. Okay, so I just, again, we're the topic is developing. Is there any tools or things that you use that you can impart on our listeners about the developing side of it? Is there something that the way you know? Is there certain things that you put the ideas through with your students and kind of make, you know, litmus test and things like that? Can you tell us a couple of tangible things that you might use at this particular stage?
Well, hard work.
Yes, a
I
lot.
think I think to be honest, what is it? There's that quote. Is it Carl Jung? I don't know. Or dreams work if you do. I
Yeah,
think
exactly. Yeah,
there's a
and I know you talked a lot about prototyping. You talked about doing your research. You talked about touching base with your end user. Is there some other tangible things that you do at this stage to either make that decision to let the idea go or continue with the idea, and anything that you add on to it at this point?
um, well, again, I mean, talking in terms of exactly what I'm going through right now as I design this thing, as I come back to the thing about being intuitive, it's really hard to constantly and maybe walking away occasionally, and as we said before, but it's and stopping to listen to your inner voice, and you get like gut feelings of like, wait a second, and you need to stop and may have moments of meditation, moments, you know, like
Yeah.
all the scientists when they talk about, they go for a walk, go have a bath, or go just do
Yep.
something in nature, go and
Do
have
something distracting.
just go and do something else. If you're getting bogged down in the complications of why isn't this working, and in an idea, quite often the moments of inspiration come when you relax your left hemisphere chatter, and you allow your right
Absolutely.
hemisphere big picture thinking to come to the fore, and those happen in moments of silence actually, and
Yeah.
moments of being with just yeah just being. And I
Yeah,
think
well,
that's
it's
when you
it. I
can
mean,
hear.
the phrase "sleep on it" comes from that, right? So,
Yes.
sleep on it is walk away from it for a second, let your brain process it subconsciously, and when you wake up in the morning, you wake up with this refreshed thing, and you go right back into it, and all of a sudden, the problem's solved. I'm a gamer. I do that all the time. If I get stuck on a puzzle or something like that, and I try it over and over and over, I definitely have to walk away, go outside, water the plants, take a walk. I can come back and figure it out. So yeah, that's an important part of design thinking in general. Just to, that abstract journey that you take, instead of just looking at it straight ahead, you have to take yourself to the side on that abstract journey to kind of get there. So
Yeah.
that has been really great. I know we're at 8:40 now, so I want to kind of read some of the comments and questions from the chat. So our friend Zaviko says, Rosina, you're beautifully emphasizing how much agility and openness is required for educators and facilitators in order for creativity to emerge in learning spaces. Fortunately, because of your work, Rosina, and others, we will have more facilitators and learning spaces in the future. So congratulations
I
there.
hope
That's
so.
awesome.
Thank you.
And then Aaron, thank you. You asked me to type in the Foresight profiles, and I will definitely do that for you in just a moment. So here's a question from Melvine. It says, Rosina, I was wondering if you have a thought about creating an innovative tool or platform that can inspire, connect, and educate teachers and children using your concept model. If so, is it open to additional regions?
We will do this eventually. We haven't done this yet, but it will be coming. So, I mean, you can see what we're doing, keep up with us on davinciliveskills.com. But we're getting there. We're just at the beginning. So we're on exciting, the moment, exactly as we're talking about, this moment of development, and we're developing this system. We know it's going to happen. The change is happening. So it's about, I suppose, that whole thing we were talking about before. It's about knowing the need in the market too, isn't it? When you're designing
Yeah.
it, and knowing the needs out there, and then working towards that thing in terms of ideas. But yes, we know that there's an online need, and we will be working towards that. And we're currently doing pilots, so that's what we're doing in schools. We're doing sort of 8-week tester pilots, and then running our projects run in 12 and 16-week sort of things. And we have Davinci qualifications that we're all developing. So we're right at the beginning right now. So I think the other
Nice.
thing to say is, in terms of when you're working on developing ideas into projects, and is to incorporate other people in that. So it's all about community and collaboration. And I think it's not feeling that sense of competition with anybody. And you think there's people that are
Yeah.
doing the same thing. It's like, yes, you're doing the
Yeah.
same thing as me. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Let's all work together.
We're
Let's
more
find a
alike than we are
way.
different, right?
Yeah. And I think that's been key too, is just finding out how many like-minded people, and that how exciting that is, that we don't need to always be in competition with each other. We can actually
Yeah.
collaborate with each other and help each other grow. I think
Well,
that's
that
really
brings up
important.
another point that I talk about a lot, and that is bringing the collaboration in early as possible. But a lot of times that can't happen, and so I talk about the concept of what I say assisters and resistors. So there'll always be people that assist with your idea, and always be people that will resist your idea. At what point do you think about those on the resistor side, and when do you bring them in? Do you bring them in at the beginning? Do you bring them in to kind of help you build the idea? Is that a concept that you think about when you're doing this?
I love it when people don't agree. I'm so excited. That's my
Well,
that's
I
what,
mean, again, I come from the corporate world, so it's always like legal and HR. No one wants to bring legal and HR into the room
yeah.
because they say that they're naysayers, but they're really not. If you brought them in earlier, they would have ownership of if they helped you create the idea, they would have ownership, and they would really help you put that idea forward. So in your situation, you probably have encountered that at some point. So how do you deal with that to either make sure that everybody feels like they're part of the process, or kind of turn the heads of those that are being resistant?
Yeah, I think for me, I just get really excited when someone doesn't necessarily agree with what we're doing. Or I think that's, to me, is like the challenge of finding out what is it. Because that's the same when you're in a class, exactly as you said before. Like, if there's one kid that's like, I just don't want to do this, and
Right.
you're like, how can you make this what you believe in interesting to that person? that's the challenge, and that's what I find that's so exciting, because well, what it's really about finding out what drives them, isn't it? And
Yeah,
it's about listening to them and saying, well, what is it? What's your point of view? That's amazing. How can we do what we're doing to meet your point of view? How can we come?
I love it.
It's about
And kind of putting it
building a
back on
bridge.
them. It's putting it back on them, right? To
Yeah,
help
it's
them
like,
problem
let's
solve.
find where you are. Let's find out where you are, and then we might be able to build a bridge there. And I think
Absolutely. I
that's
love it.
probably what I would say. Yeah.
Okay, we have another question from Shelley. Shelley says, Rosina, do you have research-based data that you use to support stakeholder mindset who are reluctant to let go of standardized measures of success? She says, I find this to be a big need, reducing the concern that if we don't focus on academics 100%, the student will still learn and be ready for college, career, and life. Maybe even better off if we focus on creativity. So do you basically, do you have research-based data that you use to support that stakeholder mindset?
Yes. Well, I mean, I don't know if that's exactly answering your question, but I know that, for example, the Times Education Commission just recently published a load of data, and they were saying that it's costing the UK business 52 million pounds a year on lost revenue by having to retrain everybody because they're not skilled, they're not ready for the workplace. And just that one fact is just like, this is insane. We're
Yeah,
having to retrain everybody because our education system isn't preparing people with the skills they need for work, like
that should be enough, right?
I mean, if
Yeah,
anything, I mean, let alone the fact that they're unhappy and stressed out, and even if it's designed for them and they're incredibly academic, I've got students that have got 3As and been in tears, or like known students that have done that and just not been able to cope with the fact they haven't got the 3A stars.
yeah,
And it's like, I didn't get I worked so hard and I thought I was clever and I've just failed. And you're just like, you got 3A, you know?
yeah,
And I think that it's just, the pressure is so great, and it doesn't need to be that way, because it's about what's the end outcome, what do we actually need them to know in life. And I think we need a huge range of different skills to make up a community and all the different jobs that are possible.
right.
And I don't know, I've lost the side of the
No,
question.
no, it's all right. You just reminded me of something, and that is you talked a lot about collaboration, and one of the natural outcomes of this is also relationship skills. So when I teach design thinking or I teach workshops like that, I kind of whisper, I'm like, hey, this works in your day-to-day relationships with people too. The active listening and making and accepting offers and things like that. At its core, it's human relationships. So the benefit that your students are getting not only is this tactile way of going at ideas a different way, but also how they interact with each other. Do you actually cover that overtly, or is that again more just like built into it?
I think that's built into it. I think I was just also thinking about the question. Oh, my brain! There's so many questions going on in my brain.
Sorry.
No, I was just trying to.
And I'm mildly ADHD, so I go back and forth. So sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm already trying to answer the question before as it came to me, which was about how to deal with, was it universities or maybe
Yeah, research
people,
your research. Yeah,
the people not having to have high stakes exams and those qualifications. And I think that's a massive push of what we're trying to think about is talking to universities. So yes, it's very research based what we're doing. We're trying to work with universities to get grants on research, not only from what we're doing, but also based on the research that's already gone
yeah,
on. And I live right next to Cambridge University, and so I'm trying to work with as many professors there as I can, because this future of education is coming whether we like it or not, and it's just how we guide it to into reality. And so it's like finding out how it's gonna go, in what direction
yeah.
it's going to go, because it's coming. And I think the World Economic Forum, which are pretty much in charge of most things, I suspect, they have put forward a manifesto for the future of education, and a lot of it's going online. I think assessment will go online. I think that there's no real reason that students should be sitting all in May or June, hundreds of them in cold, stuffy or hot, stuffy rooms,
Right.
in rows doing exam papers. It doesn't make sense in the technological age. I know that not everybody's got computers yet, but
Yeah,
we're heading more and more to that space where we will have most people will have some kind of access to a device that we can to get qualifications on. And I
Yep.
think that if an algorithm can do a paper for you and to give you a result as quick as possible, like here's the result of this test, then it doesn't, you can fail it. And
Right.
like a music exam, I think if we take education and exams more like music exams and grades, it's like, well, if you're going to join an orchestra, you're going to need grade 5 trumpet or whatever it is. But
Right.
if you're not, then you probably don't need grade 5 trumpet. No one's going to be upset with you. If you
Right.
fail it, you can probably do it again. And
Right.
I think exams need to be seen that way, that we can test. Testing is fine. It's great. I wouldn't want someone on the road that hasn't been tested. But if you fail your driving test, you can do it again and again and again. And there's no kind of stigma about that. It's not
Yeah.
about you're this age, you have to do it then. And if you fail, you're a failure. You can retake it, but
Right.
the next type of thing. I think it's just changing the mindset, and it will take time to do.
Definitely. And I always say it's hard to argue with data. When you have your data backed up, it's
Yeah.
you can really make a good point. So I'm going to go back to one of the questions in the chat from Aaron. He said, "Can we talk?" Or they said, "Can we talk about money, please? The catch-22 of needing a prototype to secure money, but needing money for the design thinking process and prototyping. What are your thoughts on that?"
Oh, money.
Yeah, stifling sometimes, huh?
It's the hardest part of all of this is getting the money side of it. Yeah, that's not my forte, I'm afraid.
Hmm.
I think there are people that are brilliant, and that's the whole thing I was saying, is it takes a whole range of people. Some people are great at getting the money and dealing with money. That's not my forte, so I'm probably not the
Yeah.
best person to ask on how to get money. I'm an artist. Like,
You're right, right.
what
Well, Aaron,
artist do
I
you
can answer
know?
that. I worked for Disney for 32 years, and anytime that I was looking for money to prototype a project, again, showcasing the data, it's really hard to argue with the data that's leading you in a certain space. So in most cases, I was able to convince leadership that I could get the money for prototyping because I had the data to support it. So
I think
I'll answer that way. It wasn't always successful. A lot of times I had to say, "Hey, I've got this thing. It's not going to make money for 5 years," and saying that to a big corporation is it's kind of difficult because
yeah.
it's all based on revenue. So, okay, so let me just check the chat one more time, see if we have any other questions. Carabo says this is design thinking on another level. So bravo to you, Rosina. Okay, so Rosina, before we head out, just a couple things I want to tell the audience. This is our third. We have actually selected. We've selected a winner of the Ideas World Cup, and they are from Stoke-on-Trent in the UK. What was it? The Staffordshire University? Is that what you heard? Yeah. So congratulations to them. Our second place was in Durban, and our third place was in Casablanca. Next week we are going to have a follow-up session here about making your ideas a reality. So we look forward to that. And Rosina, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I would love to connect more and just hear more about what you're doing. I'm sure our audience here would love to connect. So you're on LinkedIn, hopefully, so folks that are here can connect with you. I would love to just ask you any kind of parting ahas or words of wisdom that you would impart on our audience, on people excited about educating differently, about the different thinking, design thinking process. Any other words of wisdom that you would impart on us?
Yeah, just try not to give up on the dream. Keep
Yeah,
working on the dream. Dreams work if you do. I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's yeah, don't
I
give
love
up.
that.
When those moments when you just think it's all gone, I can't do this anymore, and you're so tired, and just think, or have a sleep, and the next day you might have a bit more strength to keep going on that idea that you've been working on, and it's worth to keep going and accept those failures and to allow that to happen. And as you say, in terms of like getting money and stuff, it's about inspiring people, isn't it? And I think you can do that if it comes from here.
Yep.
So it's
Oh,
we all. I
100%
think
agree.
I suppose I come from a spiritual place where I call it a dharma. So it's my pathway, and I think it's to finding your pathway and what you're good at and what you're put on the earth to do. And if you find that pathway, then it somehow, even though it's really hard sometimes, it feels right. and
Yeah.
it's
And you've got all this external pressure on the outside. So you might feel like you have a gift, but other people are trying to take that gift away from you or tell you don't have that gift. And perseverance is really, really important. Perseverance is also important when it comes to ideas, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I learned early on is there's no bad idea, just bad timing. So if you have a great idea, the world might not be ready for it yet. So don't get rid of that, discard that idea, keep that idea somewhere, keep it articulated, and you might be able to bring it out a year later, years later, whatever it takes. So I love that inspiration part of it, and using Davinci as kind of that overall inspiration for you, I think is so perfect. I mean, what a diverse, not just an artist, he was just a diverse individual. And throughout time, if you think about those who have influenced a lot, you think about someone like Da Vinci and Salvador Dali and Gaudi, and just the way that they thought about things and went about things is really important. One of the stories that I tell, I know you're probably a Da Vinci expert, so one of the stories I tell in my creativity training, just want to dispel this to make sure I'm telling it right, but I talk about the different brain waves and brain states: beta brain mode, alpha brain mode, theta, and delta. And I talk about theta, how Da Vinci was an expert at theta because he would actually kind of fall asleep on his paintbrush, and when he got to that unconscious point and his paintbrush dropped, he'd pick up and start painting what he was doing. Is that a correct? Am I telling that story correctly?
That's one I don't know, so I'm sure.
Well, it's another thing we use is the penny dropping moment, which is when not Nikola Tesla, but I'm forgetting the dude's name, but basically he did the same thing. He kind of put a penny between his knees, and right at that point he wrote down his ideas. So Da Vinci did a similar thing, and look what we got because of that. So really, really great. Anyway, Rosina, such a pleasure to chat with you today, and it's this is the first time we met virtually, so thank you so much for being with us. And again, for those listening, we will have this in a recording on our website. And congratulations to our Ideas Cup winners and Stoke-on-Trent in the UK. And I'm just making sure I'm covering all my bases here. Next week, again, our follow-up is making your ideas a reality. So we hope you join us for that. And Rosina, again, what a pleasure it was to chat with you, and hope our paths connect again. And please connect with both Rosina and myself. We are both on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And again, thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lee. It's been wonderful. Really lovely.
It has. It's been really great. Hope you have a great weekend too. Hope you have some fun creativity things that are in your docket for the weekend. So, and it's already you're 6 hours ahead of us. I'm on Eastern time, so you're already almost there. So, well done. Anyway, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Yeah, happy ideas.
All right, exactly.